Hello and welcome to the Holistically Psyched podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Choate, a nationally certified school psychologist turned stay-at-home mom who now has the freedom to share what school districts don't want you to know after spending over a decade in the field of education. My goal is to help you learn all you need to know about special education that districts often gatekeep. Each episode will dive into how commonly laws are blatantly broken and tips on leveraging special education law to support best practice for students and teachers alike. We'll also feature interviews with parents and educators who are navigating these challenges head-on, along with those who are making strides to improve this broken system. This channel is for you, parents of students with suspected or diagnosed disabilities who already have or might need individualized education plans or 504 plans. It's also for teachers, counselors, and fellow school psychologists who are feeling the strain of a system that often leaves us feeling burnt out and overwhelmed. So if you're ready to learn, advocate, and empower yourself, child, or students, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Holistically Psyched podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Choate, a school psychologist turned advocate for teachers and parents navigating the complexities of special education. Today, I'm thrilled to have Danielle of STEAM Made Simple join us. Danielle is a former teacher and proud parent of her own neurodivergent child. We will explore her journey, how understanding neurodivergence can transform classrooms, and why embracing it as its own form of brilliance is so important. Danielle, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's start with your own personal story. Can you share what it was like for you with teaching, when you first understood what neurodivergence even was, and a little bit about what you do now?
Yes, of course. So neurodivergence was always something in my head. I just didn't have the word for it. So as a teacher and working with so many different types of kids, it was in my mind like these kids don't all learn the same way. And I didn't have a word for it yet. So I think that having neurodiversity as a topic of conversation to bring awareness of how kids and adults are just so uniquely wired, and that it's not a one size fits all. And I think very early on in my teaching career, I figured out, okay, I can't stand in front of a classroom and teach 28 kids. I have to do individualized approaches, small group work. So I think it was pretty early on when I knew that traditional methods were not going to be able to fly in my classroom.
I didn't even have this plan to ask you, but were you taught that in your undergraduate or master's degree?
I went to a really amazing school, and it was very well known. I kind of feel like I have trauma from it though, a little bit. They were like, if you're not 15 minutes early, you are late, you will do, but I also have this appreciation for it as well, because they really had a big understanding of the whole child and using all components of how a child learns and how it's all different in child development. So I do feel very blessed to have had that experience, because it really had a strong foundation for me and prepared me very well. I felt like I could go into any classroom because of what they taught me in my schooling.
That's so good to hear because,
Mm-hmm.
like I've interviewed a dyslexia expert and she's worked with like hundreds of teachers and they say like, no, we're not prepared.
So it was in Naperville, Illinois. It's called North Central College. Shout out to them. But any district, they wanted teachers from North Central. So just having that as a graduate from that college was just really awesome to have, I guess, on my resume.
And just remind me, where did you teach? What state?
I taught in Illinois, the Illinois suburbs. I've taught in affluent areas, Title I schools, and then my husband and I moved to Michigan, and I did teach second grade in Michigan as well. My first year, I taught sixth grade, so that was the highest grade that I taught, but I'm certified K-9, and then I went back to school to become a learning behavior specialist, and then I got my master's degree in curriculum and instruction.
And when you said the behavior aspect, that kind of leads into what work you do now. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that shift that you've made from becoming a teacher.
Okay, well, both roles as being a teacher and a parent have taught me to see challenges and quirks not as actual problems, just ways that kids learn and how they're all wired differently. I think you talk to any parent and they have multiple kids, both of their kids are not the same. Even parents of twins, they are just completely different individuals and they need different learning styles as well. And in schools, we can't just have this one size fits all approach. So, what I do right now is I help parents and teachers bridge that gap, but also give neurodivergent learners or any type of child who learns in a different way opportunities and strategies so that they can thrive in the classroom and at home and unlock their inner brilliance.
I totally agree with you. And I love that you have that perspective of a parent and a teacher. I don't know how you feel, but before I became a parent, it was so much easier to be like, oh, I would just do it this way. Then you become a parent, and you're like, I can't even parent my children the same way. Like if I have two different kids, they're totally different, unique human beings. Like I can't even approach both of them the same way. So, from your perspective, why is it essential for teachers to have a solid understanding of neurodivergence?
I think because every single child, no matter who they deserve to be seen and to feel understood. So, what that means for teachers, if teachers understand and get neurodiversity, then they are able to create their classroom to be more inclusive so that all of their kids can succeed, not the kids who are just conforming or doing exactly what they're told. And I think that teachers having this awareness just helps them understand how brains work and how kids learn, and then it unlocks incredible potential. And then once teachers can see that in their kids, then the kids feel this mutual respect and that they're able to really shine and show all of their passions, and they know that they're loved and seen and understood.
It's like that sweet, safe spot where you can create that relationship and rapport, right? And you're not just like, not necessarily just like the student and teacher relationship, but it's more of like like a mutual understanding. I like how you said respect. I think that's a good description. And I think I want to pivot. I didn't even plan this, but we should probably pivot and explain a little bit about what neurodivergence is, because parents might be listening to this and be like, oh, that doesn't relate because that's not my kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, it's not just a medical diagnosis, right, that you get from a doctor of like, oh, you have autism, so that means you're neurodiverse. So maybe you can share a little bit about what does neurodiversity mean? Like, what does that look like?
I think that neurodiversity is such a broad term, at least it is right now. I think that it's kind of a big umbrella for explaining how we perceive information in the world around us. And when we talk about children, it's how children learn. And whatever we deem as normal, I like to think of neurodiversity as the opposite of that, right? Like, so, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different way of learning. I think back to myself as a kid, and I remember like telling myself, like, why am I not understanding this? Like, why am I not learning it? And it's because I didn't learn through popcorn reading and having anxiety of my turn coming up. So, to explain to parents, it's like, sure, yes, if your child has a diagnosis, if they're autistic or if they're dyslexic or if they have sensory processing disorder, like that could fall under neurodivergence too. But like also just kids who learn differently, who require more of an individualized approach, which I wish I had the stat written down, but I think it's like 1 in 5, are neurodivergent learners. And I think that most kids and most people thrive when their needs are met at the individual level. So I think it's a new movement, but I also think that teachers are doing it and they're doing it well. They might just not know that it's falling under this umbrella term.
That makes me think of like when you're sitting in the SST meetings and the teacher's like at a loss of like, I have no idea what else to implement. Like for me as a school psychologist, I'd go observe the child in the classroom and I'd be like, afterwards, I'd meet with the teacher and be like, you didn't even list all of these supports that you provided for this kid. Like, you're not only seating them at a specific spot in the classroom, you're like making sure that their paper is a certain way, or like you're giving them a specific pencil, or giving, like, even coming over to their desk and explaining your, directions, the way that you explain it to the class, coming alongside them and explaining it in a different way. Like, all of those things are, like you said, you're meeting the individual child at a different level. Like, it speaks volumes for the teachers that, not only know of that, but are able to implement that with their students. So it's not easy, as you know, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
not easy.
I'm really glad that you said that too, because a lot of times teachers are really hard on themselves as well, and they don't see everything that they are doing. I mean, something as simple as a nonverbal cue, that's helping that child, right? And to have someone like a school psychologist come in and observe, like, you're able to take a step back and see the whole picture. But most of my friends are teachers or school psychs or SLPs or OTs, and I can see all of the amazing work, but for some reason, and I guess that's what moms do too, right? We don't give ourselves enough credit, and I think that just little tweaks that will help a child thrive is basically what needs to happen in the classroom.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. I totally agree. How can teachers shift from seeing neurodivergent traits as challenges to actually recognizing them as strengths?
That's a really good question. I think that comes down to reframing. And we do this all the time as adults with positive affirmations. And we know the power of being able to like rewire our brains. But what if we did that with kids too and their challenges and reframing it instead of looking at a kid and saying, oh my gosh, he can't sit still? What about just saying, like, how can I use his energy for something that will help him learn, right? Like me getting on a kid for not being able to sit still is not going to help him, right? Like what would that do? But if you look at it and say, okay, like how can we use I always like to say, like, how can we use their powers for good, right? Like, so how can we use his energy to and shift the narrative a little bit, right? Instead of just like what's the reason you need him to sit still, right? He'll actually focus more if you let him stand and have a band that he can kick. So it's all
Mm-hmm.
about recognizing what they need, whether that's movement breaks, hands-on activities, but neurodivergent traits often come with unique strengths. Like sometimes a kid might be hyper focused on something, or they're super creative in art class, or they have out of the box thinking, and then using those traits to help them in the classroom is a way of not seeing these behaviors as challenges and to just embrace them.
Interesting. As you're telling me all of this, I'm picturing a type of learner in the classroom. And all I'm thinking about is, like, they're labeled typically as a behavior problem.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, a neurodivergent learner, right, is someone who's not learning typically like the other students, not responding typically like the other students. They might not be, I think you said it earlier, like they're not following the rules or like being consistent on, like, oh, why are you responding differently, right? And those are typically like the behavior kids. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about how, like, that used to be like the favorite population of kids that you worked with was like those quote unquote behavior kids. So I don't know if you can share an example of how you adjusted your teaching methods to better support those behavior kids or neurodivergent students in your own experience.
And even just to piggyback off of that, like, yes, those kids that you're talking about, and I can like see them in my head too, but there's also neurodivergent kids who are masking, right? So they might not have these behaviors that are very obvious to somebody, but they might be holding it all in. And as teachers, we need to do our due diligence of really like understanding that kid and figuring out what they might be struggling with and then accommodating to what they actually need. But yes, so the kids with the behaviors that might be a struggle, I always, I'm like a rule follower. So I would ask permission and then I would kind of break the rules. But what I would do as a teacher, like, I guess what I would ask a principal is, do they need to like take this test exactly this way? Or if they can show me that they understand a concept in a different way, is that okay? And basically, like, the answer was just, well, the kid needs to take the test, right? So, I mean, I just remember this one kid and talking about not being able to sit still, like, he loved movement. And so I just like in conversation, like walked around the school with him and he aced his test verbally, right? Like, but then
Amazing.
there's other kids who have overload with verbal directions and verbal conversation. So visuals would be more appropriate for them. So it's all about like really recognizing what the kids need and just giving it to them, because they have so much potential. And it always makes me sad when I talk to parents and they're like, they failed this part on their test, but they know it. So my I would tell them to ask the question, does this test have to be in this format, right? Because that's not an accurate or valid report card, because the report card says, can they do this skill? And they can if their needs are met.
And I just want to confirm, you're not just talking about kids with IEPs. You're talking about typical kids that are not necessarily qualifying for special education, correct?
Yes, for IEPs, I obviously know they're by law, you follow them, but even though there's certain minutes, I would always meet those, but I treated every kid just like they all have different needs. And a lot of the kids that I worked with, they weren't even brought up at problem solving, and I'm still collecting data on them because you know what? Like, someone's going to need to know these like detailed observations, and we don't need to wait like 2 years before a formal IEP meeting. You like collect data now, do the interventions now. It's just about meeting the child, and the IEP is just a piece of paper that like follows with them and protects them. But as a teacher, you don't need that in order to help a child.
Yes. I think it's so helpful, especially for educators and parents to hear this because I talk about it till I'm like blue in the face, right? But response to intervention is the teacher in the classroom providing those interventions and supports. Just
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, like the accommodation, the different approaches that you can take, even to take, like taking a test, right? Those are the different things that you basically do trial and error with the child to see what is actually working and what's not working. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you've tried. You're like, that actually wasn't helpful, didn't work. And then you just go on to the
Yep.
next intervention, try that. And I think it's so difficult for teachers because they have 30 kids in their class, right? Sometimes 33 or upwards of that. And to think of an individualized approach to each child is so overwhelming. But I think the way that you're talking about it is in terms of like just trying to get to the basis of like knowing the student. Like, these kids are with you like 8 hours in the day, 7 to 8 hours in the day, 5 days a week. Like you get to see them a lot. You get to know their different quirks. You get to know what their struggles are. So yeah, I just love that you shared that. And I think every educator needs to hear that. You don't have to wait for an IEP or even a formalized SST to start collecting data and doing these response to interventions.
People get freaked out by like the word data, but it's really like, you just take the date and you record an observation and what was happening in the environment. And something that I always like to do as a teacher is like go watch them at recess or in lunch, just like see what they do and how they act and form a relationship with them. And then
Right.
they'll tell you so much. And they're like your
Yeah.
little buddies. I mean, there's not a kid that wants to go into a classroom and just listen to listen, right? I mean, there's of
Right.
course like the kids who play school at home and love it, but that's not the norm. So it's about that mutual respect piece.
And to piggyback off of the masking thing, I think a lot of parents don't recognize because they're like, oh my gosh, my kid comes home, there's behaviors all over the place, and they're just like melting down, and I don't know what to do. It must be from school. And then you talk to the teacher, it's like, they just got an award for like best behaved in class. And the
Yeah.
teacher's like, we don't see that at school. It's only a home problem. And it's like, actually, it's a both problem, right? Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
still something that should be talked about and addressed. And why is data so important? You're transferring all of this information and like you said, data that you've gathered on a kid, you're passing the baton off to the next teacher. And a parent is a big part of that process because you're the one that's really going to be able to bring all of that data to the next teacher when the school might not have time for it. Maybe they don't do it. Maybe the teacher left, right? Or maybe there's a new teacher. And so the parent really should be on top of like, hey, this is what worked with my kid this year. How can I talk to the next year's teacher and make sure that those same supports that worked and were effective are going to be implemented again.
I think that is so key. And some of the best techniques I've had, like just, passing the baton, I like how you said that, is I've had principals where in the beginning of the year, we would meet with, the grade below us and then the grade above us. And we would have our class lists, and then we would just go around and we would do a one on one with the teacher. Then we'd go to the next one, and they would just tell us everything about the kids and like how they learn and what they love and what they like to help out with. And it's so fun. It's a great way to start the year.
I love that. Whoever your principal was, that's amazing. So let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention, the link between neurodivergence and brilliance. So how do you see this play out in your own child? Because I know you mentioned before that you have a child that is neurodivergent, or in your previous classroom experience.
So I think it is something, like you said, that gets overlooked, but I think that there needs to be more opportunities for kids so that they can show their brilliance. I'm a huge advocate for STEAM education, and that's because it's hands-on learning. And that's the closest thing I have found to a one size fits all, because I've seen kids who are struggling so much academically, and then I have kids who don't like to do math, or I've already said they don't like science, and they thrive with it. And
And
same
what is
thing.
STEAM? Just real quick for
Sorry,
those that
yeah.
might not know. That's okay.
Science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And it's not about looking at the disciplines separately, but all together. And it's really about, if you take a step back from the subjects, it's really about the 21st century skills that kids need, which is what builds a strong foundation for a child, which is problem solving, cooperation, collaboration, creativity. And STEAM naturally does that, right? So if you have a bunch of open-ended materials for a kid to do, and you're having them work in a group, and you want them to design a bridge that can hold 4 cars, right? They're going to have to work together. They're going to have to fail. They're going to have to make mistakes. They're going to have to persevere. They're going to have to be creative. And the best kind of projects are where all the projects are going to look so different. There's really not like a step by step. There's not an exact outcome. And that's when you see kids thrive. Like the quietest kids who would never participate in class, they're the leaders in these groups. And it's so cool to see as a teacher, just a kid who loves art, and then that's going to come out in a STEAM project. And I know that a lot of teachers have the opportunities for like a STEM teacher to come in, but this can be done with like a social studies lesson. This can be done with a math lesson. I mean, these are things that should be happening in the classroom. And then also really just figuring out what kids are curious about. Like there's like the running joke about why, but really listening to those questions. One of my favorite websites for my students is to go to wonderopolis.com, and they have all the why questions. Like, why does I don't know, why does the earth spin, right? Or some, whatever you want to say. Like any
Yeah.
question you can think of, or like, why do we have toenails? Any random question. It's on this website, and I have kids give a little presentation on it, and they just love it because it's just, you know, fueling what they're craving. And yes, all the academics matter too, but kids matter, and who they are, and them feeling confident and competent, because they are. They just need the opportunity.
Creating the opportunity for them to probably get to know skills that they have that they don't even know that they have, right? Like you said, the
Mm-hmm.
quiet ones that are like silently just participating, or like not really participating, just showing up in class, and yet they become the leader in the group. Like that was something that I saw often in the classroom too. And it's like so cool. They get to learn something new about themselves through that process. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So, how can parents of neurodivergent learners, how can they nurture that brilliance in the environment at home?
First thing that pops into my mind is, what are their passions? What do they like to do? What are they drawn to? And creating an environment like a lot of parents think, okay, my kid needs to play with blocks because blocks are open-ended and they can do all of these different things. But if a kid doesn't like to play with blocks, don't make them play with blocks. What are they actually interested in?
Right.
And giving them that. So my one of my kids has a crazy imagination, and as a teacher I know this, but I'm like, we need to do a makerspace at home. Like, he doesn't need toys. He needs popsicle sticks, and he needs glue, and he needs glue dots, and he needs rubber bands and googly eyes, and he creates and invents the most amazing things. He already like has inventions for the future, and I'm like, do I write these down? Do I submit these somewhere? I mean, he's 4, and
That's
it's
awesome.
just he I asked him, I was like, are you going to be an engineer when you're older? And he said, I already am. So he just has
I
that
love that.
confidence, and that makes me feel so good. But I think just really following their passions, what are their interests, and just being obsessed with their passions with them. And that will just show them that you just believe in anything that they love, and go do it. I mean, if they're obsessed with animals, like, take them to the zoo, take them to museums, just opportunities, experiences, and that's it, really.
So it's so funny you say that's it, like as if it's like nothing. But I think from like someone who's very type A, who's very orderly
Mm-hmm.
and like educated, right? Like I think that almost gets pounded out of us of like, don't focus on your passion, just focus on like what's gonna bring you success or what's gonna like meet the requirements or just like follow the plan, right? It's almost like the opposite of what our society says is important. And I was actually just talking to my sister about this the other day of like, as an adult, you really have to kind of like put your pride to the side and say, whatever, I don't even care if I'm interested in it at all, but whatever this kid is actually interested in, I'm going to be all in. I'm going to be like 100% asking questions and like find out opportunities to learn more about it. And you have to take the pride out of it and you have to take the like, I'm an adult out of it and be like, no, I'm going to be so excited about what you're excited about.
I think like a lot of parents think it's just about, learning their alphabet and numbers, which is important. It is very, very important, but you want them to just love and like yearn to learn. Like, that's what you want. And you want them to just take off with anything and ask you questions that you have to do research to find out. And they want you to not know the answers all the time, right? Like, I never, even with my students, I never pretended like I knew everything, because I obviously don't. Kids know, and I tell adults this all the time. I'm like, your kid knows way more than you do. You just got to listen. Like, they'll teach you so
Oh,
much.
I love that. That is so sweet. You have personally taken your experiences and passions and you've turned them into your own digital resources to help others. So, can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing now and how it's making an impact?
Yes, I started working with teachers and using my degree in curriculum and instruction to create resources that were very engaging for kids and to have that individualized learning in the classroom. And I found a following on Instagram of parents and who were very interested in empowering their own children. And so I started creating digital products for them. And I started where I believe any teacher or parent should start, which is social emotional learning and focusing on emotional regulation skills and building that strong foundation. Then I started any like question I would get, I would start creating like little freebies. Like, I have a kindergarten readiness checklist and what makes a toy a open-ended toy, and the grounding technique for, calming down. And then I moved on to independent play and just kind of like listening to the problems that my audience was having. And where I have found myself right now is really working with moms who are so highly educated. They really are just such amazing advocates for their kids, and they just want to bridge that gap between home and school. And a lot of times it's kids who are neurodivergent and who are either have an IEP or want an IEP, or just feeling like they're the needs aren't really being met, or their kids not being seen for who they truly are. So my goal is to really have them work as a team. I always tell parents, like, most teachers, right? I'm sure there's bad doctors, there's bad teachers, but most teachers, they're rooting for your child. It's just, I don't, so often it's like teachers against parents. Like, if we can just work as a team and have like communication with each other, like, that's, and the kids pick up on that. Like, a student knows if their mom is friends with the teacher, like, and talking. Like, you want that for your child. So I try to do that, and play the role of helping kids get what they need at the individual level. And that's where I'm at right now, and it's lighting up my brain, and it's making me feel really happy.
Yeah, as you see with my page, I'm like so passionate about parents and teachers actually collaborating together. And it's funny to hear your take on that, because from my perspective, I feel like a lot of that comes from like a lack of awareness. A parent that's been telling the teacher for so long, oh, I need help, or oh, my kid needs help, or these problems are going on. And then the teacher is just so overwhelmed, and then they're not supported well at their job. I'm glad you had a great experience, right, with your job, but there's a lot of teachers.
I didn't. There was a lot of experiences I did not have. Oh. I mean, I definitely talked about the good ones, but there is clear teacher trauma over here. Don't worry.
Oh. Yeah. So like, as you know, then like, I feel like there's so many hats put on teachers, and then they're not well equipped, right, to follow through on what their responsibilities are. And they either don't have the personnel, don't have the training, or don't have a combination of them, right? Even down to like a person literally being in their classroom to support for a time frame, right? But yeah, and then parents don't necessarily know that. If you're not really in the school system, you just assume like public school system, they have like hundreds of positions at a school. Surely it's taken care of. Like, teachers just have to ask for something and then it's done. It's like, no, that's not how it goes. Not at all. And then parents get to the point where they're frustrated and they're like demanding an IEP, because they're like, just like you said, I need individualized support for my child. I know that they have unique needs that are not being met. So then they just bulldoze over to like, they need an IEP. It has to be special education. And I love what you're saying in that it doesn't have to necessarily be at IEP level to provide those tailored, individualized supports for students through response to intervention. It's nationwide, right? Under special education law. It doesn't have to just be an IEP that should be implemented prior. And yeah, I think like you said, if people hear the word data, or they hear like individualized, and they're like, oh, there's no way, I can't do that on a daily basis. So yeah, it can be so overwhelming for parents, and it could be so overwhelming for teachers. But that's the key, right? Is creating the collaboration between the two for the best interest of the child. So I love that we can connect on that for sure, because I'm very passionate about that, as you can tell.
Yes.
So now that we talked a little bit about your resources, can you share where people can find you to connect or to find your resources?
The best way to find me is on Instagram. My handle is STEAM, STEAM, made simple. And you can find all of my freebies and my resources on my Stan store, which is just right on the page. There's a little link in the bio.
And you have like a pretty solid following, right? How many followers do you have?
I don't know. I don't know where my phone is right now. I think it's 28,000.
28,000, yeah. And you'd say that's majority parents or teachers?
I don't know. I think like it was 50-50 for a long time, but probably more parents now. But most of my customers are teachers who are also parents.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing your story and insights today. For our listeners, remember that advocacy starts with knowledge and compassion. Don't forget to check out Danielle's resources and stay tuned for our next episode of Holistically Psyched. Thanks so much for joining me today. I would be so grateful if you could share this with anyone you can think of who works in education or happens to have a child with disabilities. If this was helpful for you, make sure to subscribe so you can hear some of the crazy and amazing stories of what is really going on behind the scenes in public education. Until next time, remember, in the famous words of Maya Angelou, each child belongs to all of us, and they bring us a tomorrow in direct relation to the responsibility we have shown to them.